Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and today we are talking about aliens. No, I'm kidding. We're not. I'm so sick of aliens. But instead, we are talking about some weird warriors from history, going all the way back to the BC times for the most part. I mean, not even getting into like quadruple digits in the year in this episode. We're going way back. And so we did another, I think I called it BC Bonanza. It was like one of the first episodes, like way back in the day, like early on when this show was truly terrible. Now it's only kind of terrible. Yeah, it was episode 11. Did a lot of episodes from before the Common Era, aka before Christ, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, 3 stories here. Looking at, but hang on a sec. Here's the thing. All right. I got to get this. Here's another thing I've been wanting to complain about for a while now. Fellas, what are we doing at the grocery stores right now? A proliferation of dudes who are just too alpha to walk behind their cart when they're getting groceries. They gotta walk beside it and guide the cart like it's a submissive woman. God forbid you stand behind the cart like a little beta. Like, God, it's so frustrating because you take up the whole aisle. All right. The aisle is meant for 2 people, one going in each direction, typically. All right. But no, you got all these dudes and it's all the same dude. All right. It's all the same, like real muscular, spends a lot of time in the gym. You can tell. All right. And maybe he's got a Bluetooth headset in. Maybe he's black. A lot of them are. It's not, maybe it's a cultural thing. I don't know. I don't know why black dudes, A, always got to be on the phone with somebody, and B, can't walk behind their cart. It's not a racist thing. Like, I don't hate them for it, but I just don't understand. I don't understand what our black brethren are doing out in the world. Like, yeah. Oh, there are some white dudes who do it. I've seen a lot of white dudes. It's the same kind of white dude. Definitely owns a Punisher t-shirt if he's not currently wearing it out in public. You know that guy? Backwards hat. They all have a backwards hat on. Just got to let you know we're alpha bros, man. We're not going to be standing behind nobody. Not even our cart. Where we put our macros. Where we put our low-calorie, low-carb wraps in with our boiled chicken and rice. Our 8 pounds of boiled chicken and 30 packs of rice because that's all we eat because we got to get our macros. Brr. Whatever, dude. God, I hate society sometimes. Just weird, dumb little pockets of society. Because here's the thing. Like, everybody's got their thing. I get it, right? Like, you got the anime crowd who just loves them big titty anime girls, and that's fine, right? They're not hurting anybody. They're off being weird by themselves, ordering life-size Japanese sex dolls, because no one's going to love them. No real people are going to love them. Or, like, the only girls that will love them are, like, fat, pimply, oily-faced ogres who also love anime. And, like, it's a sad double standard, but the dudes aren't interested in them because they're not doing that. All right. But like, they're not out in public. They are kind of out in public being weird because they talk like anime people. Like, you ever encounter one of those dorks in public, just like they're working the front desk at a Best Buy. That's a comedy bit that's been worn out, but it's fine. Like, just the way they talk to you the cadence is all Japanese and weird. Like, it's not funny how I would do it, where it's not like, welcome to the Best Buy. No, they don't do that, but they're like, oh my goodness, sir, I am sorry. let me see if I can go and retrieve that item for you. Like, and then their motions are all weird. You can't see the hand motions that I'm doing because it's audio. There's not a visual component to this because I'm not filming this for YouTube. But like, they're doing all that. And then you got the people out there who inexplicably just enjoy watching people play video games, even though they can just play the game themselves. I like it's like, here's the thing. I know that like the good argument for it is it's the same thing as like watching dudes play football or baseball. Like you can go and play football or basketball, but like, can you? Like you can't go and get on a full-size stadium and play with a bunch of people in the same uniforms and with the same crowd watching and all that. Like you can't do that. But you can absolutely 1000% recreate the same experience of a dude who's playing the same video game. Because it's all the same for everybody. So you got that crowd. That's a weird crowd that I don't understand. All right? And then, oh, God. And then you got people who like think like JoJo Siwa is really cool and interesting. Why? What? Anyway. I was not prepared to go down that long of a tangent. Like I came in hot. The plan was to come in hot on the dudes who walk beside their cart in the grocery store. And then I just got real cathartic for a second there and just unleashed on, you know, a larger point that like there's people out there who have podcasts and they yell in their empty home in front of a microphone to like 10 people who listen on the regular. That's it. And that's another weird subset of human society that, look, probably doesn't need to exist, but it does. And I'm part of it. So who am I to judge? I guess is the final kind of way to wrap that up. Anyway, 3 stories this week of Hastein, Marcus Sergius, and Mithradates. Let's get into it.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
So Mithradates was a young, somewhat kind of scatterbrained soldier in King Artaxerxes. I think they were Persian army. I think it was Persia, or they were either Persian or they were fighting the Persians. It was one of those. I mean, this is 400 BC. So like, I don't know what they're doing. But 3 years prior, right? King Darius II's death allowed Artaxerxes to ascend the throne, but Artaxerxes' younger brother Cyrus challenged that claim to the throne. The dude's mother, Parysatis, it's Parysatis, but that's not how you say it. Parysatis, she sided with Cyrus, and then they both hatched a plot to overthrow Artaxerxes. Because every family's always been like Star Wars, like just causing calamity all the time. Overall, just getting a bunch of people involved, getting a bunch of people killed that didn't need to be killed. And like, that's crazy that like a mother who really probably shouldn't side with either of her children, should probably encourage her children to work it out amongst themselves, come to a, you know, an equitable compromise. I stuttered over that one. Like, but no, like this mom clearly picks the younger kid. How bad? Like, you almost always go with the older kid. Older kid's almost always better. Almost always. Not often. Not all the time. But like, typically the firstborn gets it right 100,000% of the time. I say that knowing full well that I might have a second child in the future who will listen to this and might think, oh wow, I'm already playing from behind. That sucks, Dad. Thanks for that. I'm going to go get addicted to heroin now. And I'll show you. Anyway, love you, future kiddo that doesn't even exist yet. That's not even guaranteed to exist. You get it. Anyway. Oh, man. Look, peek behind the curtain. It's been a couple weeks since I've recorded. I got a lot to say. All right. It's been building up. And it's just how this episode's going to go today. Anyway, so Cyrus and what's his face? Artaxerxes. All right. They're brothers, but their mom has sided with Cyrus. They think Cyrus should actually be the king. They launch a plot to overthrow Artaxerxes, but then the coup failed. And Cyrus flees to Sardis, which is somewhere in the Middle East. I don't know where. Didn't bother to look it up. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, may not actually be in the Middle East. I just paused the episode to look it up. It's in Turkey, which is like, it's like the Middle East, right? East Middle East. That's what it is. It's the East Middle East. And it counts. Anyway, in 401 BC, the armies of Cyrus and Artaxerxes then met at the town of Cunaxa and began fighting. I don't know where Cunaxa is. I'm not pausing the episode to go look for it. The battle went well for Cyrus, and he was on the cusp of victory. He's about to defeat his brother. He's about to become the king of whatever group of people this is. And as he paraded himself on his horse through the enemy lines, who had already decided to surrender and bow at Cyrus's feet, Mithradates, who had been hiding out in a cave or a hut or whatever the desert had back then, he burst through the crowd and confronted this parade. Initially, Mithradates did not recognize Cyrus because the tiara had fallen off of Cyrus's head during the course of the battle, which tiaras was. You think alpha bros now are going to be wearing tiaras? No, we're going to be wearing like hardcore iron thorn crowns with skulls because we're dudes. We're not wearing tiaras. No, but this is what they did in the Middle East. They wore tiaras. Probably not like pageant mom tiaras. Probably a little bit more refined. Probably like some olive branches or something. I don't know. Anyway, but Mithradates, he didn't recognize Cyrus. He just thought it was just another soldier, another enemy soldier coming through the parade being a dick. And so he thought he was going to be a hero anyway. And he thought he was going to take this soldier out who had somehow captured all of his other men. And so Mithradates is like, nah, fam, I'm going to be a hero. And so he runs past Cyrus and then stabbed him in the temple, stabbed him in the head with a dart, not a dagger, not a sword, but a dart. Just, and then blood started gushing from the side of Cyrus's head. And within minutes, he fell off of his horse and died. And Mithradates, he's a hero. He's defeated the enemy. He saved King Artaxerxes II and his kingdom. And when Artaxerxes learned that Cyrus, his brother, had died, he was relieved that his position as king had been secured, and he showered Mithradates with gifts. However, he gave him all of these things on the condition that Mithradates never speak of this event and take credit for it, so that people would think that Artaxerxes himself had actually killed his brother rather than this weird little dork with a dart. All right, real bad ego, real big alpha ego on Artaxerxes right now, because he wants to take credit for murdering his own brother, which is weird all in itself, but he doesn't want to look like a weakened king in front of his people. So he wants everyone to think that he killed his own brother and secured his own kingdom, not some little random soldier. So the gifts were then written off instead as Mithradates' work in bringing Cyrus's horse harnesses to the king, which, like, how valuable were horse harnesses back then, where you just get showered with all of these gifts? I don't know what they were. Probably a lot of gold, probably a lot of jewels, probably some hose, lots of vagine to just sink yourself into, and just all of it. And Artaxerxes is like, man, he brought me Cyrus's horse harnesses, which was what we all wanted. And I'm just feeling generous, and I wanted to give him all that. And good job, Mithradates. You did it. And so, as part of this reward, Mithradates was then invited to the big victory banquet where they would celebrate defeating Cyrus's army. He arrived to the banquet looking like Persian Flava Flav. Like he was wearing this lavish robe. He had all of these gold ornaments on it that he had received from Artaxerxes. Like he has got some drip. He's got some mad drip, as the kids would say. And he's at this victory banquet and he starts just going hard on the wine. He is living it up and he's lightweight. So he's drunk more glasses of wine than he was very well conditioned to handle. And he starts talking. He gets a little mouthy. And he's talking to Sparamzes. No, that's not it. Sparamizes. There it is. Sparamides, who was one of Paracetus's eunuchs. Which, that's crazy that women used to have eunuchs. They just used to have a harem of dudes who cut their dinks off. So, like, which I get it, because, like, otherwise, they'd probably just gang up and rape her, because that's just how life was back then. And you think it's bad now. Women used to just have to forcefully cut off male servants' dinks so that they wouldn't have any reason to rape them and they could just do their job and serve them as they were intended. But anyway, so Mithradates, he's talking to one of Paracetus's eunuchs. Remember Paracetus? He just had her son killed because her other son was king, even though she didn't think he was supposed to be king. And Mithradates is like, yeah, sir, who doesn't have a wiener? Let's talk about that later, because I want to know what that's like. How do you pee? Is it just like a hole? You just peeing out of a hole now? There's like a second belly button? What does that look like? I don't know. How do you even live? This is the BCs. That seems like a wound that would get easily infected. I got more questions now. Anyway, I'm not going to go look up how eunuchs survived or how that surgery took place. I don't need to know that. I do kind of, but I don't. Anyway, so Sparamizes, he goes up to Mithradates because he sees he's drunk. He starts a conversation. And, Sparamizes is like, that's a magnificent dress, Mithradates, that the king has given you. He's going to sound like Bill Cosby. All those chains and bracelets are glorious, and your scimitar is incomparable. That's a direct quote, by the way. He probably didn't sound like Bill Cosby when he said it, but that's a direct quote. The king is clearly made you happy and the object of everyone's envy. And Mithridates like, I sure am, dog. I proved myself to the king to be deserving of even better and more expensive gifts than these, but he's kind of cheap. He's kind of cheap, and he cheaped out on me, and I deserved more, but this is all I got. And Sparamizes, he sees what's going on. He sees bad. He's like, I do not doubt that. So since why don't you go together, why don't you tell me what makes the harnesses you brought to the king so special? And Mithridates, he's like, bro, you really think this is about the horse harnesses? No, it wasn't, you douchebag. I was the one that killed Cyrus. Artaxerxes didn't throw no dart. If he did, he probably would have missed because he threw it like a girl. I threw it, caught him right above the eye, blood everywhere, dropped him like a brick. That's not a direct quote. It's more of a paraphrase of what actually happened. And so by the time Mithridates had finished his monologue, everyone sitting at the table had gone silent to listen in. It's classic comedy trope there. You got the low murmur of the crowd all behind him. And then as he's just going on, it just all gets silent. And then everybody's looking at him like, oh, this is a new development. And still, like Mithridates, he's so drunk. He has no idea what's going on. And he looks around as everyone just kind of then awkwardly kind of turns their gaze to another part of the dining room. Like, oh, no. Well, we didn't hear what anything's going on. But he did, because Artaxerxes eventually found out that Mithridates was taking all the credit for it. And so he ordered Mithridates to be executed by way of scaphism. What is scaphism? I'm so glad you asked. All right. So scaphism is an ancient torture method, which started by taking two canoes. All right. The convicted was placed in the one on the bottom, and then the other canoe was placed on top of him. So kind of just closing him in like a little sandwich. And so Mithradates was laid in the bottom canoe in such a way so that his head and hands and feet were left hanging outside of the boat. And then the other canoe was then placed on top. It was a heavy canoe, so he couldn't like move it off of him, right? So Mithradates was offered some food to keep him alive during the ordeal. If he refused to eat, they would poke his eyes, which is just rude, but whatever. Once he had eaten, he was then waterboarded with this mixture of milk and honey. And as the milk and honey like soured and hardened onto his face, you know, it just good, that gross smell of like sour milk, flies would start to move in and start to set up camp on his face. All right. Meanwhile, inside the boat, because when you eat, you got to poop, and Mithradates, he's pooping in the boat. And this would attract more insects and parasites who would find their way through the cracks in between the two canoes, and they would burrow inside. And not just burrow inside the canoes, they'd be crawling up inside Mithradates, crawling up in his butthole, probably in his pee hole, and then any other holes that they chewed out themselves. Gross. And they would then just eat him from inside, just rats and maggots and all of these, and they would just eat him from inside out. And the ultimate goal of this scaphism torture was that once the tortured person finally died, the top canoe would be removed to reveal this gangrenous, rotting corpse full of maggots and rats and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, Mithradates survived on this for 17 days. Like 17 days of getting milk and honey poured on your face and then being force-fed other food, pooping it out, and then just feeling maggots. Hey, look, and maybe he was into it, man. Maybe it's like, you know, Richard Gere and the gerbil thing. Maybe initially like feeling a maggot crawling up your butthole, see a little erotic, right? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe, look, probably not. But who knows? Who knows? You don't know. Maybe he was into it, and then eventually, like, he died because his insides were just, like, eaten out and infected. Anyway, it's a good start to the stories. The other two aren't as exciting. Our next story here is of Marcus Sergius, who was a Roman general during the Second Punic War, where Hannibal's forces from Carthage in North Africa attempted to destroy the Roman Empire. In just his second year as a soldier, Sergius had his right hand chopped off. And this was, of course, at a time when you needed your right hand for pretty much everything, because left-handed people were still like demonic, right? So you didn't have your right hand, you couldn't do anything. You also really weren't given a medal or a free steak at Applebee's on Veterans Day because you got hurt while serving in the military. You just were either cast out from society, or you did what Marcus Sergius did and you just got over it and went right back into war. And he suffered at least 23 more injuries, including the loss of his left hand and both of his feet. So now he's just like full on nubs at this point. But that didn't stop him. All right. He's very determined to not give up on life, which is admirable, because I would be out for sure. Like, I'm killing, like, if I lose my hands and my feet, I'm killing myself. Or like, I'm figuring out a way to kill myself because I can't obviously do anything because I don't have hands. So he decides to go all Luke Skywalker on the Carthaginians, and he had an iron hand molded on what was left of his right arm so that he could hold his shield and just start bashing some skulls in. I don't know why they didn't give him an iron hand for his left hand too, make him be Iron Man, but they did the right hand. And so he went on to foil a siege of the Italian city of Cremona. He saved the other Italian city of Placentia. He captured a dozen enemy camps in modern day France. And during all of this, with his iron hand, and he's just Iron Manning people, bashing people in with just a shield. Doesn't have a sword. He's just clubbing them to death with a shield. During all this, he was actually captured by Hannibal twice and held captive for 20 months before he eventually escaped and returned to the battlefield. So just no quit in Marcus Sergius. I don't know. He eventually died, but he did a lot. He's a good soldier. Anyway, our final story here, during the first millennia, right? So we're into the AD, the common era, right? And during this first 1,000 years, you've likely been led to believe that the Greeks and the Romans were the only ones doing anything in Europe because they kept fairly extensive historical records. And like, that's not true. There were all kinds of other ethnic groups all over Europe doing stuff, including the Vikings, who didn't really write a lot of this down because they were too busy raiding everything. However, one record that we do have is in 859, a Viking leader named Hastein led a fleet of 62 ships with the Swedish king Bjorn Ironside to the Mediterranean Sea. The Vikings had spent the previous few decades terrorizing the Frankish Empire in modern-day France and Germany, and they were ready for a new challenge. They were ready to move on to something else. Unfortunately for Hastein, his army was defeated quickly by both the Asturians and the Muslims in modern-day Portugal and Spain. But defeat meant nothing to the Vikings, who then proceeded to attack and destroy Algeciras, which was a port city near the Strait of Gibraltar at that southern tip of Spain. And then after raiding locations along northern Africa and the islands off of Spain and France, Hastein and Bjorn Ironside invaded Italy and attacked Rome. Why doesn't anyone talk about the Vikings raiding Africa and Rome, right? Like, they were all over the place, but we don't talk about it. I don't know why. So the Vikings, they show up in Rome. They don't really know a whole lot about European history. But they did know enough about Rome to know that it was very important. I mean, you could probably just walk into Rome and see the Colosseum, see the Vatican, and like, oh, it's probably pretty culturally important place in this world that we live in. We got to get it. And so they decided to come up with a new plan to take over the city rather than their traditional raping and pillaging. The problem was that the Vikings, they weren't really one to pay attention to detail, and because maps are for sissies, right? So rather than invading Rome, like they thought they were going to do, the Vikings actually were preparing to lay siege to the city of Luna, because Rome was actually like 250 miles away, which is crazy. But they thought they were about to go capture Rome. They weren't. And so Hastein, anyway, ordered his men to carry him to the city gates of Luna and inform the guards that he was dying and wished to convert to Christianity. So, and here's the thing, like, he knew about this because after raiding several Christian cities over the years, Hastein was very familiar with how Christianity worked. And they knew, like, oh, we could get a convert. Let's do this. Let's go. And let's do whatever you need, man. And so the guards, believing that they were doing the Lord's work, led Hastein and kind of some of his men into the city and up to the church, where Hastein was baptized. He took communion. He did penance. And then he likely was just like, just kidding, guys, and leapt from his deathbed and just led his men on a raid through the entire city. Classic. On another occasion, which was much more Viking-esque, Hastein completely faked his death, which that's, he saw that worked well the first time. And he actually went through with the full funeral. Like, he is just in a coffin. They're going to have a whole big service to like mourn the loss of their great leader. And on the day of the funeral, 50 of Hastein's robed men with swords, concealed underneath their robes, were allowed into the city. I don't know what city it was. Why would I not put that there? Anyway, maybe they didn't specify the city. Anyway, this is a great show. 50 of Hastein's robed men come in to mourn the death where they're keeping him. And as the funeral commenced, right, Hastein jumps out of his coffin, because apparently locking the coffin wasn't a thing back then. Because I don't know, maybe they all thought that dead people would come back to life because Jesus did it. So maybe someone else can. And so he jumps out of his coffin. He slices off the religious leaders' heads, and they raid the city before storming out of, they storm out of church to take the city, right? Hastein went on to raid more locations in Italy and the Mediterranean. And then on the way back home to Scandinavia, he stopped in North Africa and bought several, quote, blue men back with him because, of course, they're going to be super racist about it. They returned home in 862 with 20 of their original 62 ships. Hastein then went on to torment various places in England before ultimately disappearing from history in 896.
All done.
There you go. Some weird warriors in the books. Let's take a quick recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, if you kill somebody in war and then the person in charge is like, hey, don't take credit for this. I want to have all the credit for it. In return, I'm going to hook you up, dog. I'm going to give you everything. Just take it. Like, don't blab to the truth to anybody, because then you're going to get shoved in between two canoes and have maggots eat out your insides. All right. Number two, Marcus Sergius. Luke Skywalkered himself into an iron hand and just went ham on a lot of Mediterranean Europe. And he did a lot of good things, even though he was very disabled. And then number three, Hastein, Viking leader, had a habit of like faking his death because Christians were super gullible back then, still are, and would just leap out of his coffin and then just start raging on people. And it's probably pretty metal.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, we are looking at some super secret spy stuff. We're looking at the stories of Edwin Wilson and Robert Hansen, two guys who were spies, but then they were like double agents, and then the KGB got involved, and calamity ensues because spies, and like things are probably over dramatized. It probably wasn't even that serious. But we will look at those two stories next week. So thank you all for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast